In this video, I would like to talk about the high-level workflow of the Prancer validation framework and understand different components of that. Whenever you run the framework, first we have a connector file or multiple connector files. And with the use of the connector file, we can connect to a provider. That provider could be a cloud provider like AWS, or it could be a remote Git provider like a GitHub. So this connector file has enough information to be able to connect to those external systems. Then in the framework, in the Prancer framework, we have snapshot configuration files. We could have one or multiple of these files. And in snapshot configuration file, we specify what type of resources we want to monitor. For example, let's say with the connector, we want to connect to an Azure. And we want to monitor a virtual machine. So in the snapshot configuration file, we have the information of that virtual machine, how to connect to that. In the case of Azure, for example, we have the path to that resource from the Azure. When we run the framework, connector has information to connect to the Azure, for example, like an SPN account in the connector. And then snapshot configuration file has information about the monitored resources that we want to capture from that cloud provider, in this case, like a virtual machine. And when we run the framework, based on the number of snapshot configuration file, we generate one or multiple snapshots. And these snapshots are basically a JSON file with all the attributes that we can check and validate from that provider. For example, in the case of virtual machine in the Azure, we have all the information about the virtual machine, like the name of the machine, information about the network interface card, information about the disk, about the OS, and all the other information. And then after that, we have one or more test files. And in these test files, we are specifying what information we want to validate or to test. In our example, let's say we want to test whether our virtual machine is using a premium disk or a standard disk. So the workflow will be the connector has information to connect to the Azure, and then the snapshot configuration file has information about which resources we want to monitor from the Azure. With this information, we generate the snapshots. They are JSON files with all the attributes available from that provider. And then we have one or multiple test files. And then when we run the test file against the snapshot, we will generate some output. And in these output files, we have the result of the test, whether the test is passed or failed based on the items that we are testing in the file. If I go back to the Prancer Hello World application, you can see all of these components available in these files. First, we have the connector.json file, and we have the information to connect to a Git provider. Then we have the snapshot configuration file, and we have the information of which resource we want to monitor. We have the test file and specify what's the test that we want to run. And when we run the framework, we will generate the snapshots. You see the detail of the snapshot in this file. And then the output. In this case, the result is passed.